Hello, everyone. Welcome to another C2C Care webinar. We're going to get started in just a few minutes, but we're going to take also a minute or so just to let the room populate, because it looked like we had quite a few people waiting in the waiting room. So we're excited to have you join us for this, I guess, end of summer webinar for C2C Care. I'm going to start by sharing my screen, and then we will go directly into our program. Okay, everyone should be viewing my presentation right now. Well, again, you are here for Safeguarding Collections. This is an August 20th, 2024 webinar for C2C Care. We'll be running from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern, so roughly an hour-long program, just to make sure everyone knows kind of what they're here for. My name is Robin Bauer-Kilgo. I am the C2C Care Coordinator, and I'm based right outside of Silver Spring, Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C. And I definitely invite all of our participants and our folks who are watching us to kind of say where they're at in the chat screen. I'll go over a couple of quick technical notes, and then we'll jump right into our program. If you're, this is the first time you're joining us, this is our home on the web, connecting to collections.org. On our website, you will see a fabulous archive, basically, of all of our upcoming program and our old programming. C2C Care has been around for over 10 years. So there's quite a resource backlog that you guys can go take a look at of past webinars and courses. So I encourage you to go to that website. The website also has links to our online community, which is a fabulous place to ask direct care questions of all of our fabulous group of volunteer monitors who will go check out. So if you have questions about storage, something that's happening with your collections, I encourage you to post in that community and someone will take a look at it and get back to you with an answer. We also have a curated resources section, which I also encourage people to look at as well. Just to keep abreast of what is happening with C2C Care, I encourage people to go check out our 2 spots on social media. We have the handle at C2C Care on both of them. One is on Facebook and the other one is on the network formerly known as Twitter. On both those networks, you will see links to upcoming programming, upcoming courses. So if you're on either of those, I encourage you to go join them. Couple of quick technical notes. This is a Zoom webinar, so you have access 2 ways to actually talk to our panelists. One is the chat function, which it looks like everyone is using quite handily, so I don't really feel like I have to explain that. But the one thing with the chat for everyone to remember is that is kind of to tell us if you have like technical questions or general comments. If you have a question to ask one of our panelists at any time, we really encourage you to use the Q&A box. The reason why is because, as you might see from the chat, it is a bit of a stream of thought, so you can lose comments and questions in that stream. So if you have a question you want to ask, put it in any time in the Q&A box, and we will be sure to get it during our Q&A section. We have 2 programs currently open for registration on our website right now. One is part of our free programming, which is the monthly program like this one is. It's happening on September 27th. It's Consideration and Care of Islamicate Collections. For that one, we encourage you to sign up for it if you happen to have these types of collections within your actual institution. We have an excellent speaker coming out to come talk to us a little bit about just kind of care, how to look at it, how to consider it as part of your collection to make sure it's being respected and honored as part of your collections. And we also have a course coming up starting on September 17th. Courses are a little different. They're more in-depth looks at certain subjects. We do charge for our courses a nominal fee, but you have a series of anywhere from 5 to 6 webinars or meetings where you can meet with people to really talk about these projects and kind of documents that you're working for. The one starting on September 17th is all about developing a collections management policy with our course instructor, Becca Kennedy. We're excited for this one because you will have a chance to meet with Becca within Zoom meeting to kind of go over your CMP, your collections management policy, which is one of the big documents within our cultural institutions. And she has a fabulous source of resources, anything from podcasts to videos to other things to kind of help you develop this really important document. And I'll also note that we have an early bird fee that ends on September 2nd. So if you are interested in this course, go to our website, sign up for it, and try to get that early bird fee before September 2nd. So now we're going to go ahead and get into the program today. I am going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to introduce our speakers for today. We have Warren Bunn, Senior Manager, Collections and Exhibitions at the Corning Museum of Glass, and Moya Dunville, Risk Analysis Advisor for Protect Heritage. Today, we're going to be talking about safeguarding our collections. And I'm excited for this one to kind of wrap up our summer programming because as we all have experienced working with the collections, sometimes we are presented with situations that we might feel a little uncomfortable with when it comes to just dealing with videotaping, visitors coming in, all that kind of fun stuff. So Warren and Moya are here to talk us through kind of their experiences, kind of ways to maybe mitigate some issues that that might be presented with. So we think it's going to be a really fun discussion today. So Warren and Moya, feel free to take over, and I will see you all at the Q&A period at the end of the program.
Great, thank you, Robin. Appreciate it. Hello, everyone. Let me just get my screen rolling here. Okay. Can everybody see the presentation slide here?
Not yet.
Excellent. So my name is Warren Bunn. I'm the senior manager.
Not yet. Not what yet, Warren. Sorry, not
Okay.
yet. Yeah.
Let me try that one more time then. We'll try this one.
Now we're good.
Good, perfect. A little technical difficulty never hurts. So my name is Warren Bunn. I'm the senior manager of collections and exhibitions at the Corning Museum of Glass. Today we're going to, the agenda for our presentation, I'll speak for about 10 to 15 minutes on some challenges and some case studies that we've experienced here at the Corning Museum of Glass. Moya will take over for 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'd like to reserve the bulk of the time for questions and answers and maybe some real life experiences that people can relate as well. So just quickly, here at the museum, Corning Museum of Glass, we have one of the most comprehensive collections of the history of glass in the world. Our collections range in size and complexity and fragility. Here I manage the collections management team, so I have a fantastic team of registrars, fantastic team of preparators, expert object handlers, object movers. I have our digital imaging collections photography team. They also do all of our gallery lighting, which is really kind of a special thing we have here. Experts in lighting glass, and so we carry that through into our displays. And then I also have our conservation department. So we're lucky enough to have in-house conservation here as well. Just a sense of our collection. The piece on the left is a Roman cage cup from about 300 AD. They take a thick bubble and excavate all of that glass away to leave this very fragile network. The piece on the right is a 200-inch disc that was made for the Hale telescope in Mount Palomar, and that is about 200 or so, well, 200 inches across, but it's about 20 tons. So two examples of extreme differences in scale, but also both extremely fragile pieces. The piece on the left is a piece called Woven Heaven, Tangled Earth by Susan Plum. That piece probably weighs less than a pound. It is light and delicate, and two people get on either side. You count down, pick it up, the thing cracks and makes all kinds of noise and tells you just how unhappy it is in its existence and moving towards entropy. And the piece on the right is a large section of a ribbon machine. That's a piece that we acquired. It's about 95 feet long when it's fully assembled, weighs about 75,000 pounds. And when it was in production, they used it to make light bulbs and holiday ornaments, and that was capable of making 1,700 light bulbs a minute. So really cranking along. So again, just to show you sort of the breadth of the collections that we care for and the sort of the differences in their needs. Just a couple of pictures of myself and a couple of our fantastic preparators. You know, fragile neon, we deal with electrical work, we deal with all different types of materials. The piece on the right is a Dustin Yellen. It's a big laminated piece of glass with collage elements. So not only is it 3,000 pounds, but it also has light sensitive materials, which we are increasingly finding problematic in our daylit contemporary and art spaces. So we are constantly battling all of the forces of physics and nature. The other thing that we balance is this idea of access and collections care. And so, you know, as an artist myself, I love the idea of objects being out in a gallery with no barriers and no sort of, you know, no impedance for people to be able to experience it. but also it's all glass. And our mission and our goal here is to preserve this material for the future. And so, you know, I have to work a lot with artists, designers, curators to really balance out how do we protect this stuff while still giving a very good aesthetic experience and not taking away from the work. At times, some artists and some designers are a little more resistant to that. You know, why are you keeping my piece captive? And why are we creating barriers to the work? But when it comes down to it, our goal is to leave this collection in better shape than we got it. And part of that is keeping it in the state in which it's in at any given time. So this piece that I had on the title slide too, this piece is called Continuous Mile by Liza Liu. And it's actually it's exactly a mile of beaded rope. And it's these little glass beads. There's something, they did a calculation, it's like 4.5 million beads on this thing. And you build a form, both interior and exterior. You sort of drizzle the rope in over the period of about a day and a half, and then you remove the form, and it leaves this incredibly luscious, incredibly minimal, beautiful sculpture. And what we found is I always understand when a visitor is sort of, you know, is it really glass? And this one, you know, when looking at it, it's sort of hard to understand. Is it soft? Is it solid? Is it bendable? So, you know, the innocent touch, I can almost understand. But as you can see in the image, that's not really an innocent touch. It's somebody reaching over the barrier. And in the foreground, you're actually seeing the barrier glass there. So, you know, this is somebody who reached in and then literally pulled it up over the barrier. And one of our docents at one point, this was like working in a zoo. Every day we had to feed this piece. And one of the docents suggested, well, maybe you could have the artist make a little sample of the rope and you could put it on a little stand there, and then people wouldn't want to touch the actual object. And so we reached out to the artist, and that was a tactic we deployed. And literally the first day, some kid hung on the sample and broke it, and beads were all over the floor. And we would, after that was repaired, we'd witness visitors go up and they would touch the sample, and then they'd turn around and touch the piece to make sure we weren't lying or trying to trick them. So what we find is it's a fairly constant battle. One of the statistics our museum uses is outside of the island of Manhattan, we're the most visited attraction in New York State after Niagara Falls. So we get a very high volume of visitor, and we get a visitor that typically self-identifies as non-museum goers. And so it's part of our goal and our mission to preserve the work is to help people understand why you shouldn't touch the work and why it's important. And the barrier systems and closed cases are a way to do that. So just some of the challenges of collections care, obviously, who have environmental challenges. We have HVAC systems. We have challenges with maintaining good climate, temperature, and humidity in galleries, weather events, leaks, you know, the high humidity during summer, cold, dry air during the winter. You know, it's a pretty brutal climate in upstate New York most of the year. As I mentioned, visitors, we have, you know, sort of the innocent touch, and then we have sort of acts of violence. Everybody's seen the videos of selfie sticks and people falling into the canyon or into the display. Unattended children, we have the unintentional damage that occurs. Sometimes people are leaning over to take a picture and drop their camera or their phone in, brochures, visitor tags, things like that. And then there's the special events. Museums are more and more being asked to take on different types of events. There's after hours, there's filming, there's movies, music performances, VIP tours, and sort of requests to have access to material that's sort of unimpeded. And actually the special event was the impetus for this conversation. We had an opportunity at one point, we were contacted by Red Bull, the manufacturer of the energy drink, and also they run an entire series of adventure sports, so motocross, race cars, Formula One, and they've become well known for creating these sort of radical adventure sports videos. So, you know, airplanes flying through canyons and motorcycles jumping over buildings and things like that. And so we were approached by Red Bull, the museum was, and they proposed the idea of the bull in a china shop. They said, well, what if we could drive a motorcycle through the museum? And they had a motorcycle professional rider who is an expert wheelie rider, motorcycle stuntman. And they first approached us about riding it on the roof of our glass-topped contemporary spaces. And, you know, after we kind of had a good laugh about that one, you know, we said, well, what realistically, we have a gift shop that fits your concept. And if something gets broken, we can just buy more. And there were many, many meetings about this, and we ultimately worked with them to kind of come up with a plan. Could we mitigate the risk to the collections and mitigate the risk to people while still having this sort of dramatic sort of moment and a video that would sort of promote not only their product and their sort of excitement range, but also sort of promote the museum. It resulted in a series of phone calls and contacts from our colleagues in the world, and that's how I heard from Moya. You know, what the hell were you thinking? Why would you ever let this happen in your museum? And so I'm going to show you the video, and then I can explain a little bit. But there were meetings after meetings about what we could do, where I did these color-coded maps of, you know, absolutely no riding in this area with these fragile collections. You'll see one part of the video where he sort of rides down this long corridor in our contemporary art wing. And one of the reasons we sort of allowed that one to occur was it's really art light out there. There's really nothing that he could run into. The concrete floors are, you know, 4 feet thick. I mean, it was a pretty manageable and safe thing. The interesting thing about the video, and I want you to think about it as you watch it, is there's perception and then there's reality. So the way they shot this, it looks like he's right next to a piece of glass when in fact they're using depth of field. Some of the other surprising things, though, that we did find out, and one of the lessons was all the conversations you have, all the planning, you got to be there. They filmed this in the middle of the night, and our collection staff was not present, nor were the conservators. And the next morning, we were completely surprised to come in and find that the floors were really sticky. And we said, well, you know, we talked about protecting the floors and how fragile the floors are. And they said, oh yeah, we did. We put down this combination of Coca-Cola and maple syrup and water so that the motorcycle wouldn't slip on the floor. So their idea of protection was protect the motorcycle and the rider. Ours was to protect the floor and the artwork. And as most of the conservators will start chuckling when they think of that combination of a sticky material, it was like a frat party basement on all of our floors. So anyways, enough prelude. Here is the Bull in a China Shop video. And this is just an excerpt.
Done. Motorcycles been built, the road trip's been made. I've just pulled up to the Corning Museum of Glass for a little trial by fire. We're gonna see if we can come and leave this place with everything in one piece, just like it arrived.
And I'm going to spare you the hot glass demo space part of it, but this is available on YouTube if you want to look up the video. So, I mentioned all of the planning discussions and the sort of the no-fly zones that we established and all the discussions we had. At no point did the use of a haze machine or fog machine come up in any of those discussions. At no point did the use of a drone in our gallery spaces come up. Luckily, the one section that he was in that was our science and innovation section is really, it's a science and industry gallery, and it's really built innovation center tough. It's a really sturdy space. But again, there were certainly some surprises, and you can see that how the perception would be like, what did you exposed your collection to all of this danger? And ultimately, we really worked hard to sort of mitigate the risk. Another example of that is they did a similar one in the London the Natural History Museum in London. And I'll just do a short clip of this one. And they're in this atrium and they are jumping over what appears to be one of their artifacts. And what is later determined is actually a replica that they had made for this. But again, the perception is here we are jumping around in a museum space, and how could these museum professionals allow that? And, I think it's important to recognize that I think museums are trying to come up with new and interesting ways to be relevant and to sort of be exciting spaces. But it is making our jobs a lot more challenging in terms of being able to safeguard our collections. And then just the very last thing I wanted to touch on, which is sort of I mean, it's always been going on if you think of the Joseph Buys, meat pieces and things, but we're experiencing more recently the real challenge of artists creating work that's really meant to degrade and to break over time, basically. It's similar to a time-based media in the sense of this thing has sort of a lifespan. These objects here are a piece. It's a series of works that this artist makes that are done with incompatible glasses and inclusions that make the glass objects extremely fragile. And her hope is these things degrade and fall apart over time. Again, as museum professionals, that sort of goes against, our mission is to not speed that process. And so, we've come up with some ways to safeguard them. This artist specifically has a real clear protocol, and it's been documented on what happens if an object breaks during transit, what we're supposed to do, how we document it. If it breaks while it's on view, what we're intended, can we still exhibit it with all of the parts and pieces laying there in a safe manner? So, but it is causing our conservation staff and our collection staff a little bit of stress and consternation as we acquire more and more of these works that take on different levels of care. So at that, I'm going to turn it over to Moya. And if you just want to let me know when you want to flip sides, Moya, I can do that.
Sure, yeah. Thanks, Warren. And I see in the comment, a lot of people had the same reaction as I did to that video. Just, this is stressing me out so much. Oh my goodness. And, there's lots of reasons behind that. I'm going to start, I think we go back one slide, Warren. Yeah, here. I'm just going to start by looking at a few different scenarios that happened in medium to large institutions where there were some really major incidents that put the collections at risk or that caused damage to them. What is considered the highest level of protection for collections is known as defense in depth, which is a series of small overlapping measures designed to thwart a would-be thief who might be attempting to steal any part of a collection. Now, in 2017, a firm was hired to audit and appraise the collection of the Carnegie Library's rare book room. And it was found, then the library's administration was informed that many of the room's holdings were gone. And it wasn't just a few things that were missing. It was the most extensive theft from an American library in at least a century, with the value of stolen objects placed around $8 million. And these thefts had been carried out by the Rare Book Library's archivist, who'd been working in conjunction with the owner of a nearby bookshop who was selling the books for him. And this had been going on without having been detected for over 25 years. Next slide. More recently, earlier just this year, the British Museum began investigating the theft of upwards of 2,000 items and treasures from their collection. And that had been carried out by a senior curator with unfettered access to the collection. And lots of these items, some of them have been recovered. Most of them he was selling on eBay for like a literal fraction of their estimated value. He was selling like ancient gems for like 50 British pounds on eBay. It's just absolutely bonkers stuff. Next slide. This is the Corvette Museum in Bowling Green, Kentucky, where in 2014, a 40-foot wide by 60-foot long sinkhole opened up. It was 35 feet deep, opened up underneath the building. And if you can start this video, this is security camera footage of the sinkhole physically opening up underneath the showroom.
Sorry, if I keep
Yeah,
scrolling
no
ahead.
worries.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, there may be an ad playing. Oh, that's frustrating. I apologize for that. Apparently, there had been geological testing in this area and in this building before it started construction, but it didn't reveal any issues. But obviously, it became a really large problem. And the security camera footage is a little less than a minute long. We can see it's starting to open up. And then, you know, in the span of under a minute, it really just kind of, the floor collapses, and we'll see a couple cars starting to fall in here in a minute, which again, this, you know, should be giving us a bit of anxiety to be watching things like this. It's really unpleasant to watch, to see these kind of things. Now, fortunately, nobody was injured in this, but in the next slide, we can see the aftermath, which shows that, the next slide, Warren, we see some of the cars that were just falling into the sinkhole. The value of the damaged cars was about $1 million, and the structural repairs were in the range of $5 million. And these cars had to be lifted out with a crane. The hole was backfilled with 4,000 tons of limestone. And then after extensive further testing for any more sinkholes, they decided to repair the building, which they did. Next slide. So these are the chain vases at the Fitzwilliam Museum. And as Warren mentioned, you know, there's a lot of really great aesthetic reasons to want to put things on display without a barrier around them. And here we can see a visitor to the museum fell down the stairs and landed on the windowsill where these 3 Qing Dynasty vases were held. These vases had been produced in the late 17th or early 18th century, and they were part of a set that was valued up to 300,000 pounds at the time, and they were completely smashed in this collision. The man that fell into them was a little bit sore, but mostly uninjured. And the museum then spent 6 months restoring these vases, which are now housed in a specially designed case to prevent this kind of thing from happening again in the future. Next slide. I'm sure we're all familiar with this image of the National Museum in Brazil on fire. It was really known that this institution was underfunded, that it was vulnerable to fire for years. And despite many warnings, an overheated air conditioning unit caught fire, and in under 2 hours, it spread throughout the entire 120-room building. And in that short time span, pretty much the entire museum itself and the more than 18 million pieces that it held in its archive were completely destroyed. And next slide. This is the sort of last scenario I'm going to talk about. And I find this one really interesting because there was just such a series of incidences that had to kind of go wrong in order for this to happen. This is the Burton Barr Library in Phoenix, Arizona, where in 2017, a windstorm occurred and sort of lifted the building's roof, causing it to sort of shift. And you can see the tiles on the building's roof here in one of these images. When the roof slammed back down onto the building, it sent a lot of dust into it, which short-circuited sort of the fire suppression system. So it started to confuse the dust with smoke, which caused the fire suppression system to activate. And at this time, it was known by at least 6 or 7 people working there that there were some serious issues with their dry pipe suppression system. It was really severely corroded. So it started spraying 60 gallons of water a minute into the collections. So you can see, you know, sort of the stacks of books covered with plastic sheeting. And in this case, the city of Phoenix fired the library's security system supervisor, the electronic system specialist, the library's project manager who was in charge of managing the building, among other people, because it was known that there were major issues with their dry pipe system. But it did take this sort of very specific series of events to actually bring it to light. And unfortunately, it was too late. It caused about $10 million worth of damage. So I know we all are aware of these kinds of risks and we do our best to mitigate them every day. And so that kind of, you know, even outside of having events, the question remains, how do we advocate for our collections in the face of all of these risks? Next slide. So there are lots of different management styles that are employed. And one we see that's used frequently in institutions is called a command and control structure. And this is a really traditional organizational model where a single leader or a group of leaders exert complete control over all the decision making and communication. And this can work really, really well in small institutions. And in general, conservation as a field is very well set up to work with this type of model. Conservators can do an assessment or a survey and provide a checklist of things to be taken care of. These directions can come from the top down, and sort of decrees from management, and then we can consider once these things are taken care of, then the job is done and we've protected the collections. In small organizations of like 10 to 15 people or less, or in institutions with a large number of volunteers where there may not be the really specialized knowledge, this can work very well. In larger institutions, it can get a bit trickier. When you get into a medium to large sort of museum or any kind of gallery, a lot of the information is siloed throughout different departments and different collections. And each one has really specialized knowledge of their own collections. And there can be a lot of competition for limited resources. So how do we know what to prioritize? And in cases like we saw Warren talk about, how do we know what we can safely allow? So how can we really be effectively using our knowledge and influence to best serve the collections? In the heritage field, we use sort of the 10 agents of change for organizing risks to collections within hazard sources. And these were developed by the Canadian Conservation Institute as a way to detect, log, report, and then treat the damage caused. And these are physical forces, fire, water, thieves, and vandals, pests, contaminants, light damage, incorrect temperature, incorrect relative humidity, and dissociation. Next slide. As heritage professionals, I think all of us have a really aspirational goal to protect everything forever from all of the agents of change and agents of deterioration. And most conservators or any collection expert can tell you it's a really normal practice and really an integral part of our job to imagine future risk and attempt to preemptively manage any of these future risks. And I'm sure a lot of us, and myself included, are kind of consumed by them in our off hours, thinking about it late into the evening, like what's going to happen, how can we, mitigate these things. But we often operate under the really common misperception that risks are only associated with use. And this creates a mindset that can become problematic, where we see that conservation and access are in conflict. Recently in my job at Protect Heritage, we have developed a model to determine whether the risk to an object is actually elevated through use. And surprisingly, we find that quite often use doesn't necessarily elevate risk. And in some cases, risk is lowered with use. We see this primarily in cases like physical forces acting on an object in storage, where gravity may cause tension in hanging objects or in an item subject to distortion. Like this basketry that is not well supported. If these objects are being used or accessed, then the risk is actually lower because the damage would be immediately noticed and corrective action can be taken. Other things like damage from water incidents or adverse temperature, adverse relative humidity, these are much less likely to occur to objects that are in use because simply the access is going to notify us to these things that are happening. Pest damage gets noticed much sooner in areas that are frequently occupied. There are obviously cases where use does increase risk. The more frequently you handle something, the more opportunity there is for it to be dropped, or damaged, or torn, that type of thing. But it's really just to say that we have to consider there are two sides to this. Next slide. I want to really highlight that there's never going to be a magical point where we reach zero risk to the collection. There are always going to be myriad projects that could be undertaken in order to reduce risk. Some of these are going to be more effective than others. And in our field, our goal is to reduce risk and to reduce uncertainty. But there is that flawed perception that keeping an item in storage and restricting access is the best way to do that. And we often feel if something is in storage and if we know the risk is very low, then we act as if the risk is zero. And that's really not the case. So I'm advocating to kind of shift away from conflict in trying to argue with management or with other allied professionals to looking for mutual support between team members. So our job as collection stewards is to use our expertise and our influence to provide kind of accurate and balanced information to decision makers, where we can all be aware of the risks and come from a place of mutual understanding of really high level goals of the institution, including the need to access the collection and use the collection, while being able to provide the information to mitigate risk and protect all of our objects. Next slide. All of this to say, I'm not advocating for reckless use of the collection or allowing all access or like all you can drink martini nights, which was a thing that really happened in an institution. I'm just saying that if we are the people who are constantly seen as saying no to everything, then we're just simply going to be bypassed. We need to move away from wanting to control all aspects of everything that happens in the collections to really using our knowledge and our influence, and to move away from viewing conservation as a negotiation or framing allowing things to happen as a compromise. If we allow slightly higher lighting levels, how much value are we actually losing to the collection if it allows people to actually access it and use it in the way that it's meant to be used? If having social activities in a museum space is considered part of the museum's objective, then we need to stop kind of fighting and trying to make it not happen and just consider in a non-confrontational way how we can allow this to happen so that we can use our knowledge and influence and political capital to kind of make these things work. So we've reserved here a lot of time for questions and discussions, and we'd really love to hear from you. And I think this kind of thing and these types of situations are ones where we can really learn a lot from each other. So I would really encourage you, if you're able to share your experiences, share your questions, and we'll be happy to chat about that for a while. Thanks.
Thanks to both of you. Before we get into the Q&A period, I always like to share early on the fact that we have a link to resources and a copy of this presentation on our website, and also a survey link that participants can fill out to kind of reflect on what we've done in the topic and everything. I always like to throw that in first as we kind of enter in the Q&A period. So we did have some questions rolling in while this was coming in, and so we want to go ahead and start hitting them. I would also add that we do want people, because I think, you know, we were having pre-conversations to this topic and all that, we've all acknowledged that, like, we've all been presented with scenarios where people come to us and say, I have this really great idea to feature the collections. And it's kind of like what you were saying, Moya, it's always tends to be a negotiation, right? So we know a lot of you out there probably have the same situations. So within this safe space, and this is being recorded, and we are going to put it on the YouTube, FAIC YouTube channel, but if you feel comfortable sharing stories about maybe what you did, or even a quick anecdote that you can put in the chat, please feel free to do so. I will not necessarily say your name. I will say someone said this, but we also wanted to let people know we are recording this and it might be posted. So just heads up on that. Going back to kind of the initial, what you dealt with at the Corning Museum of Glass, Warren, a lot of people are asking, so were there conservation and collections people present at the recording? And kind of a little bit more background and story about that, because there was obviously a lot of concern from people watching the video, you know, like, well, okay, where are the collections people? So I was wondering if you could kind of recap that again.
Yeah, so I think, you know, the conversations we had worked a lot to sort of mitigate a lot of those concerns. And a lot of the filming they did, it was like from midnight until like 6 a.m. So in hindsight, we had security there, we had our event staff and the digital crew. You know, we were sort of, they were like, oh, they're not going to be in these fragile, collections areas. So we've got it covered kind of thing. And in hindsight, you know, again, that was the lesson learned was, you know, don't necessarily trust everything you hear. And, you know, the idea that we all needed to be, I think it was further complicated by a number of us were traveling. There was a traveling exhibition that was being installed someplace else. It was sort of a scheduling sort of conflict kind of thing going on there too. But again, in hindsight, that was sort of definitely a miss on our part. And given the experience, I think we would make a different call now. So
yeah, and I think like too, we talked a bit about in a kind of a pre-talk about how we as collections people are often considered the people who say no, like is kind of to put it frankly. Yeah, we're the dream crushers of the museum, right? And I feel like that if we're constantly presented with these scenarios and we're just like, no, you can't do it, then we do, at least I've worked in situations where people will start going around you, right?
Yeah.
which is a little not what you want at all. So I don't know if you guys want to reflect on that a little bit, or if you have any tips or tricks for our audience to maybe not have that role and how to play along with development or your board president or whoever, or kind of like what your thoughts are to that situation.
Yeah, I think I mentioned that a little bit in the talk, that if we're constantly the people that say no, and Warren actually has sort of like a tiered list of conservators that are the most likely to say no. I think he puts textile people as saying no the most frequently. Is that right? Textile people are right at the top. They don't want to say no. Put your conservators like myself or somewhere in the middle. Yeah, if you're just, your gut instinct is to say no, we can't allow it, and no, we're not going to do this. Yeah, you're sort of just going to get left out of the conversation. People are going to stop asking you. And we want to not see it as a compromise to allow things to be done in the institution or with the collections. Obviously, we have to do our best to advocate for them. And that's, you know, the job as we try and imagine what could go wrong, how can we prevent this? But it has to be a sort of working together. Otherwise, there's just going to build up a lot of resentment towards management, towards the people that want these things to happen, and, you know, sort of going in the other direction towards the people that are just constantly saying no. So trying to reframe it in our own minds in a way of saying, okay, these are the things that need to happen or that are going to happen, whether I want it to or not. How can I make this happen safely? And what do I need to do? And like Warren mentioned in his section as well, there's a lot of things that you might not think of, like, who would imagine, what kind of collections person would imagine that they're going to put sticky stuff all over the floor? That's just such common sense to anybody that works in an institution of any size, but it might not occur. So I'm trying to think through all of the questions that you need to ask, all of the things that need to be considered. And that's why I think this is a really important kind of thing to discuss in a group, or have people weigh in on, if people have experiences with things like that. Like, what did you not consider that actually ended up happening? And sharing experience and being able to learn from other people's experiences so that this can be done safely in other institutions is really important.
Yeah. A couple of people are asking about the HVAC at the Corning Museum, Warren. One of the questions is, what kind of issues do glass pieces experience with HVAC issues? Are they affected by temperature and humidity swings? And kind of connected to that, were there any considerations with the bike, with the motorcycle going through the Corning Museum with HVAC, with like exhaust and that kind of stuff?
Yep.
So I was wondering if you could answer those.
Yeah, so I mean, glass is inherently, it can handle temperature change really well. I mean, it goes from 2,300 degrees to room temperature over a period of time in an annealer, and then it's usually quite stable. So unless it has some real specific, inherent vice, or there's a really drastic temperature change, temperature is less of a problem for us. What is a problem with glass is humidity, and high humidity can exacerbate crizzling of glass. So crizzling is a chemical decomposition that will occur in some glasses, and we've seen it happen in glasses throughout the history of glass. And it typically has to do with either an instability in the recipe of the glass. So think of when you're making a cake, you sort of add a little too much baking soda, a little less, and you create this unstable recipe. So glass makers throughout millennia have been messing with the recipe to get glass to do different things. And in many cases, they result in a fairly unstable glass. And there's a really great write-up Dr. Robert Brill did. Steve Koob, also our former conservator, has a lot of writings on crizzling and why we understand that decomposition. But humidity is particularly one of the vehicles. It's basically, it's the catalyst that creates this situation that ultimately you can arrest with low humidity, but you can't sort of reverse the effects of crizzling on the glass. So humidity is a big problem with us. And at this time of the year, right now it's 75–80% humidity outside, and our systems are aging. We're having a challenge being able to maintain those spaces responsibly. The motorcycle question, actually, that came into the conversation because that was an electric motorcycle. The bike actually only weighed 169 pounds. That was all part of these discussions where there was not a huge amount of vibration. There was no particulate matter. There was no sort of chemical off-gassing, that type of thing going on with that. So it was one of the, again, in the conversation, and I saw the one where it really does look like they were really close to collections. That sort of outer perimeter area, that big hallway I mentioned, is sort of most of the galleries are these kind of vessels that contain the artwork, and then they have these portals that look out into those spaces. So, they were shooting through a piece of glass out through a doorway. The one where he sort of posed in front of the window in front of the artwork, that was a no-fly zone that we had said that motorcycles shouldn't be over there, and didn't realize they had gone there until the next morning when we either saw a tire mark on the floor or later saw the video and saw where they had gone. So again, it was, we tried to mitigate those challenges. Obviously, that's why we're having the conversation, because it probably could have been done better. I think there was a couple of questions too about sort of what was in it for the museum. And if you all have any sort of marketing and communications teams, for them, it's less about the money, it's more about the clicks and the visibility. And I don't mean it in a negative way, the no news is good news type thing, but I think that they were partnering with a world leader in marketing and image, and these people are the king of clicks, so if you can get this out on YouTube with our brand on it, and in the hot glass portion, you see like everywhere there's the logo of the museum. It was very specific in having the identity of the museum there. But again, we were really trying to have all those conversations to sort of mitigate that. The guy he's a professional at sort of riding these machines, and here we are.
To jump in on that, Warren, too, one of the things you had mentioned was there were some drone shots as well thrown in there. And I think we said, well, you were so busy negotiating motorcycle stuff, drones never even came up, and then just kind of were thrown into the mix.
And again, like when we started this conversation, I was very cautious. I did not want to sort of go into this sort of trashing my institution or anybody that we work with. But, our events team that helped kind of produce this, that lighting, a lot of that was their ideas, the sort of the haze machine, they have a party and they do this thing and it makes it dramatic. And, they don't even really think, that's partly our job, is to help educate. Why would we not want sort of, this particulate stuff floating around in the gallery spaces type thing, so, I think there's an opportunity to help the other departments in an institution understand like what our challenges are and what our mission is in terms of to preserve this material. But there's as we're seeing in institutions, there's a lot of push and pull in terms of what we're being asked to do. And to Moya's point, you get a little further with compromise than you do being the sort of the trying to be the stone wall that is immovable, so.
Yeah, I think a lot of it too is involved with like pre-education with the marketing team. That's the thing, is like I truly doubt the marketing team's like, let's hope they destroy something. Like they don't want stuff to be destroyed, you know what I mean? Because they know that's a lot of extra work for them too. So I do think it's kind of that pre-communication beforehand, like when not even when an event is being planned, but just so they understand like the value. I know I've had discussions with fabulous maintenance people and all the operations folks that once they understand even stuff about like temperature and humidity, they're like, we got it. And then they are like your best source for knowing when the humidity is off in the gallery. Like they will tell you like right away. So it's kind of one of those things where it's just like this constant education procedure. We do have folks sharing stories, so I wanted to make sure to hit them because they were lovely enough to put them in there. Someone said, I have an anecdote. I previously worked in a museum that had a functioning tattoo parlor as part of the temporary exhibit about indigenous tattooing practices. To mitigate risk to the collections, the space was divided off with shorter temp walls from the rest of the gallery space. The tattoo artist who worked on specific days and appointments were required to prevent a line of people blocking the gallery flow. The tattoo space was also booked off with stanchions and security when the tattoo artist wasn't there to prevent public access to the materials. I'm thinking most likely what happened is that that happened all the time. So, which is totally understandable. Someone else says, we had a film shoot at our historic house museum. There was a scene in the dining room with rolling food cart that ended up creating a large scratch around almost the entire perimeter of the room. Oof. The film production company ended up paying for the floor to be refinished by a professional company, which needed to be done anyway. It would have been ideal for the floor not to have been scratched at all, but it ended up being left better than they had found it. And we did not have to pay. So I'm okay with the outcome. So I think it's just one of those deals that, again, stuff can happen, but then if they can come back and either help fix it or help go towards more either collections or conservation needs, that's something to look out for as well. A couple of folks are also saying that they earmark part of the rental fee for conservation work, which is a fabulous idea. I love that idea, being like, if you're coming in collections, then you're going to be helping us with dealing with any issues that might be happening, for sure. Going back to some questions for you all, if we do end up allowing, someone puts this in the Q&A, if we do end up allowing something crazy to happen, do you have all any suggestions on how to capture all that information about the planning, the process, the end result, etc.? Like, what do we need to keep in terms of documentation, and where should this type of info live? I'm thinking like for many objects in the Corning were nearby, but how do you note that in your records? So do you guys have any recommendations on once an event happens, and like even if it went perfect, or even if something like what happened to you, Warren, happened, what is the best way to capture that information and to kind of debrief afterwards?
I mean, we definitely, I mean, we as an institution had a lessons learned, you know, we got people together and said, this is what we're not pleased with. And here's sort of the things that, you know, the institution thought went well. In terms of the objects, I mean, if there's, I mean, we're very good at documenting if there's an incident and an object gets damaged, there's an incident report and a, you know, a treatment report and a condition report, you know, that kind of thing. But in terms of this, like, I don't think there was any real, you know, what I would consider a near miss sort of in the safety world in terms of the objects. Again, we were really trying to mitigate with, you know, this sort of lightweight machine in a space not closely adjacent to the materials type thing. So, yeah.
It can be very hard to link damage, you know, if there was like vibrations or something, to link that long term with damage down the road that doesn't happen immediately. You know, if somebody bumps into something, or you know, someone falls downstairs and smashes 3 vases, that's really instant. You have instant feedback on the cause and the effect of that. But vibrational damage can be much more, I don't know, insidious isn't quite the right word, but it's so hard to link it back to a past event that even if there is the, oh, well, a motorcycle went through here, or people were riding skateboards around here. Another part of the Natural History Museum video where they're skateboarding is they ride their skateboards through the mineralogy section. And so they're going between like all these cases of gemstones, and the gemstones are probably okay, but the damage is going to be to the floors and the cases. But sort of linking that damage back to like one specific incident can be really tricky. So yeah, I don't really have an answer of like how to record that kind of thing, other than I guess noting it. I guess it's an institution that this happened on this date, but I don't know how you would actually link those back to each other.
I do think it would be helpful, almost going back to emergency planning, of doing like a debrief session after those types of events, and like going, you know, again, doing that thing where you don't come in swinging saying this all went wrong. Like, obviously bring up your concerns, right? But at the same time also being like, okay, there were some things that happened that we really need to work on in the future. And again, like, that's just cases of opening up those lines of communication and making sure that people all understand that everyone has concerns. We're trying to meet you halfway, you know what I mean? Like, just consider that as we approach. Someone asked, was there any kind of contract that outlined the scope of the event or didn't list all the things they did? So what kind of, was there like a written agreement as they were approaching that event, Warren, or kind of?
Yes, there was. And so the Marcom department and events, they sort of were handling sort of that aspect of it. My boss, the director of collections, and I were sort of trying to kind of always come around the other side of the fence and be like, wait, you're going to, you know, like, we need to talk this through type thing. So, you know, I think of larger institutions, it's a little bit like a university, like each department has sort of their own priorities and they're all kind of fighting for resources, and in some cases are not communicating clearly with the other departments what their intentions or dreams are. So, you know, I think that's probably one of the, you know, whether the directors were reviewing the contract, like, I don't think I ever saw that, because it was handled more like an event rental, like space rental, like a film crew coming in and filming a movie, for example, you know.
Right, that makes sense.
I think that's another lessons learned, though, that if there was something like this, we would obviously want a little more voice in it.
Right, no, that makes sense. There's quite a few people in the chat talking about having to deal with live flowers in the museum, which I know a lot of people have to deal with when it comes to running events, even like weddings or any of that kind of thing. Just anecdotally, and this is said in the chat as well, people do a lot of things where they'll snip the stamens, get rid of all the excess pollen and stuff that can get out of the plants when they deal with it, minimal water, all that kind of stuff. So that's all kind of, again, that pre-planning type stuff that you have to deal with. I also like how someone says, quotation marks, very special experience for conservation equals elevated stress levels, elevated heart rates, etc., which I would agree from the collection. Yeah, exactly. Crazy special, you're like, right. Like, that was wonderful. Someone was asking, just in this kind of more risk mitigation, excuse me. I work in a very small historic house museum where visitors touch everything since they don't see us as a real museum. How would you recommend combating this? We have signs and barriers set up, but they ignored. So do you guys have any recommendations for that?
I mean, I'm always that, my first line of defense is that secured closed case. Again, for glass objects, then you start getting into larger objects with a barrier. And then obviously a physical guard presence or some sort of a docent or volunteer presence. I think, we battle it just about all day, every day here too. So it's obviously not a perfect system, and we don't have it figured out. It is sort of interesting that, we have this running joke. It doesn't say Corning Museum of ? Outside. Like, why do you need to touch it? It says glass. Like, we already told you, like, it's almost like they're just trying to test, is it really glass? So, but I think having a guard in that space, we employ a whole series of little motion sensors and audible alerts. So even if it makes an audible alarm when somebody reaches into the display, it's sort of doing two things. It's letting security know somebody's doing something they shouldn't, and it's letting that person know that, is that me? Am I setting that off? I mean, we've also seen people completely oblivious to their surroundings and, set it off for 5 continuous minutes until you're like, can you please step back? So, yeah, we've had visitors step up into displays to get a closer look. I mean, it's just, I don't know. I grew up, I guess, understanding what a museum is and does, and it sort of boggles my mind that many people don't. But I think partly our job and our mission is to help educate people. I mean, the signs, like, we're the Corning Museum of Science too. I mean, they're just everywhere, and it really is interesting that people just kind of it's like information overload. They're just getting too much, and they don't read it.
Yeah, I know. A joke between me and my registrar friends is I think I've gotten yelled at almost every museum I've gone to, because I put on, when I'm walking through museums, I'm trained registrar. So I don't even think about it. I get up, like, looking at things. I'm usually looking at how things are mounted, which is very lame, but that's how I am. And then I get yelled at, usually by a security for getting too close to it, because I'm trying to peek around the side. But I do think that it is interesting, because it is like, now I do this also when my father was a big antique car guy. And so whenever I go to car shows or anything, my hands inherently go into my pockets, because I know not to mess with the cars or the artifacts or the museums or all that. So I tend to do that too. But with our public, it is hard, especially with kids, you know what I mean? Because it is so pushed to be interactive in their museum spaces that sometimes it could be a whole other kind of learning experience.
Yeah. I mean, that's a challenge for us too, that innovation center. I mean, it's very much like, touch this, touch that, push this button. Then you go into the next space and it's, don't touch that, don't get too close, that kind of thing. So we're sending contradictory messages. I mean, we'd have hot glass demonstrations where they have glass that they've made out, and people come up and they're like, oh, you want to touch it? And so we're giving that conflicting message. I did see the one comment where, instead of just doing the please do not touch, the sort of don't do it, it's, if you can show them why we ask you not to touch. I mean, you have to get the person to slow down and actually want to consume that information. But I mean, I do feel that's a better tactic to help educate somebody versus just telling them what they shouldn't do. It's sort of, let's show you why you shouldn't do this.
Right.
A friend of mine, I was just at Mass MoCA not long ago, and a friend of mine had pointed it out ahead of time, but they had this old metal door, and it just, over the years, it has all these handprints all over it. And they actually took the opportunity to, it's an old industrial building, but they put up a little sign and it said, this is a really good example why we ask you not to touch the art, because your hands are leaving this residual oil and causing damage to these materials, So it's sort of over the long term, if you can help them understand what that damage might be,
Yeah, and everybody assumes, like, I'm fine, my hands are clean, I'm just one person, I can touch it, it's not a big deal. But it's cumulative, because if everybody thinks that, then over the long term, that's a lot of touching for any object at all.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And I do like it when they, again, because I like that kind of stuff, but I do like it when they show, like, no, this is actually what the damage does over long term. Because I know most of us have sample objects in our collections that show that damage, because we like to see it, right? Because it's a proof point to both visitors, and someone mentioned in the Q&A how important it is to train kind of management, especially new management, as they come in. Kind of, these are the policies and the procedures we have in place. This is why. Kind of going through that whole educational system, even with the higher management as well, is incredibly important. And having those case studies of like, this is why, is incredibly important to kind of our world as well. It's almost 2 Eastern. So I did want to ask real quick, someone had asked about the framework you had developed, Moya, kind of showing the risk heritage. Is that available somewhere public for people to access?
It's not publicly available yet. It's still really being developed. My colleague Rob and I at Protect Heritage, we are working on doing this as part of our comprehensive risk analysis to determine use versus non-use actual damage, like use versus existence is what we call, because there is so much inherent vice in many things that use doesn't actually elevate the risk. The way that it works is that it's really specific to each institution depending on mandate, what type of collection it is, and how it gets used. So it's not as simple as just making it public. It's very specific to each different thing, but it's something that we are working on and we're hoping to roll out in kind of a bigger way in the next few years, because I think it's a really important consideration to take of how much risk are we actually adding through using this object, and what's the benefit from that. And everybody has a different kind of tolerance for risk level, and every institution has a different tolerance for risk. So it's a decision that needs to be made internally there. But we're hoping that there will be more of it in the future, because I think it's really important. Yeah,
I do think coming away from this talk today that people realize that, like, I do feel like we can't stop. Like, we want our collections to be featured, right? Like, that is something that I think we all want. Like, we have really neat stuff in our collections, and I think it's important that it gets out there. We need to work along with our development and our marketing teams and all that to make sure it's getting out there safely. And the more we work together, as we've been saying, the better it's going to be for things. At the same time, as we've all seen, stuff can happen. Sinkholes are not stopped by us working with our marketing teams, right? So I think it's important that as much prior conversation, education, and all that kind of stuff happen in order to make our collections as safe as possible, I guess, is what I walk away from. Do either of you have any final thoughts you'd like to relay to our audience? And real quick too, someone put the National Park Service risk assessment tool in the chat, which is a fabulous thing as well. But I did want to offer you each at least a minute or so if you wanted to wrap up the conversation today, or if you felt like you had anything else to share for today.
I really appreciate all the great questions, and I think I think we all have this shared. I often refer to myself as sort of the Lorax for the collection. I'm running around, I speak for the trees, and so I do sort of value the community of people that take this seriously, and I do feel like a lot of times one of my main jobs is helping people who work in a museum understand sort of what a museum is and does, and and it's sometimes frustrating, but it's also we have to keep sort of making the noise because no one else is going to do it for us, so.
Exactly.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah, I agree. And thanks to everybody in the chat that shared sort of their stories and commiserating about these collective anxieties that we have about our things. And I think one thing I would want to say was to try and, work with the allied professionals in your institution. And everybody has a really specialized knowledge about their collection, and sharing it within the institution and sharing it with each other in forums like this, I think, is the most helpful thing we can do to make sure everybody has the information that they need.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, thanks to everybody. Yeah.
Thank you both to Warren and Moya. Again, this is our last webinar of the summer, so we appreciate you guys kind of squeaking us in at the end of August. Thanks, as always, to IMLS for funding our program, and FAIC. We will be back at the end of September with our Care of Islamic collections. And I also remind people to, if they're interested, look at our course for collections management policies, because as you write policies, that can help deal with these kind of situations. So I would encourage you to go check that out as well. Again, thanks to everyone, and we will see you in September. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.